All right, so the next step, what we're going to do is actually do something with images. We're going to, first off, we're going to show how to do some image processing, some very basic image processing. So what we're going to do here is notice that I have another image, frame 2, right? Frame 2 is empty at the moment. What we're going to do is we're just going to use frame 2 as a temporary processed image. And so what we're going to do first is set that to be a clone of the first one. And so the way I do that is I tell OpenCV, hey, give me a clone of this. And what that is basically a deep copy of all the pixels in that image. And so that copies. It's time consuming, but that's fine. It's actually pretty efficient. It's a mem copy essentially. So it creates a new image and passes me back the pointer to it. And so I have frame 2, which is a version of, which is the same as that. Now just to double check, we can view this. And so let's give it another window that we pass that frame to. And we should, if we run this, we should be able to see two images of the same image, right? Two windows of the same image. And sure enough, we do, right? So we have a copy of these images. Cool. All right. So now, instead of just displaying it, what we can do now is we can do some processing. So we can see that OpenCV has a lot of different functionality inside of here. If we look at, if we go to OpenCV's documentation, we'll see docs.opencv.org tells us, and we can select different versions, whatever version we're using. So we can see that OpenCV has a ton of different features inside of here, and so a lot of different functionality. If we look inside core or image processing functionality, we can see that there are a lot of different types of things going on that we can do, that we can utilize. Some more high level than others. We're going to look at some of the basic image stuff. And so if we take a look, we can see that there are things like blurring or box filter, dilation, or erosion. So let's go over a couple of different blurring techniques, and then you can see how we use these and notice how it connects to the rest of the functionality that we can call any of these functions essentially afterwards if we need to, once we get the hang of it. Okay, so the first thing is let's call this function blur. Okay, so this is just going to give us a normal sort of box type of blur. It's not a great blur, but we tell it, okay, this blur the input image. So the first image, put it in frame 2, and we have to tell it a kernel size. We do that by giving it a size. The size is going to be a small window, and so we're going to say this is actually quite a large window, 30 by 30. You wouldn't typically blur it this much, but let's do it just to get the point across. And the anchor point we're just going to say is the origin, and that is it. And so if we now run this blurring, we should see a blurred image because we're blurring into our destination image, and we're showing that destination image as well. So let's run this, and we should see a blurred image in our processed window. And sure enough, we do. Yay! Notice a few things, right? You'll see that it's not a very nice looking blur. Okay, but we can improve on that. Hold on, my dogs, of course. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so so that's cool. So we have a way to blur an image. Let's do a little bit of a better blur. So rather than doing that, let's do what we typically do is a Gaussian blur, right? A Gaussian blur, once again, we take in our frame, destination, and we say what our kernel size is. In this case, we're just going to do like an 11 by 11. So Gaussian blur is a little bit more time consuming. We'll just give it zeros for everything else. We can modify this. Kernel size needs to be odd, okay, because it's like plus or minus, so it becomes an even window. Oops. And so If you have an even number, I think it'll crash even, so try just odd numbers there. What's happening? Build. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here you see it's a nice Gaussian blur. It's a little bit, you can see the frame rate drop a little bit. One is because we're in debug mode, and two, Gaussian blur is a little bit, especially a large Gaussian blur, is a little bit more time consuming CPU wise, but it's not too bad. Cool. All right, so that's very basics of image processing, of how we call functions within OpenCV, right? You're going to see that every time we have a function, we're going to see like input array, right? This just means something like an image of some sort, okay? So this is going to be your image. If you click on that, you'll see that different types, like things like matrix is an input array, right? So an image is a type, partly a general type of input array. Okay, so that's, we can do smoothing, we can call a variety of different functions that way. Some other fun things that we can do is we can do thresholding. So we can do some thresholding. And so if we take a look, what we can do is convert our image to black and white, to grayscale. And if we do that, then we'll have a grayscale image, so it gets rid of our color. And then we can apply a threshold to only keep certain values above or below a certain value. So this is useful for isolating particular colors of objects or particular luminances of objects, right? Or usually it's a good first step in most vision algorithms to try and get rid of some of the image frame, some of the pixels. And so what? Let's do some simple image thresholding. So the way that we're going to do it is we're going to call, we're going to have to create some global variables because we're just going to do this globally. And we're going to call a function called process threshold, and then we're going to add some data to it. This process threshold is going to be a function that we define above that is a static function, and we're going to pass this to a couple of different window GUI elements like track bars, so we can have little sliders. So let's create those. First thing we should do is convert to grayscale. Okay, so the first thing, the way that we do that is we have a convert color function within OpenCV, and this takes in our input image, our destination image, and then tells you know, the type of color conversion. And so this is a function that you can use to convert color to a variety of different formats. So if you get images from your webcam in specific formats, you can convert it to RGB, etc. So let's do this. We'll take our frame and our frame 2. This is going to be where, actually let's make this a global one so we can access it. Let's say grayscale, source gray. Okay. And this is we're going to make that an image that is global, and we'll use that afterwards. And we're going to say this is color BGR to gray. And you can see that there's a ton of different formats that we can convert to or from. Something to note is that OpenCV, at least in Windows, typically doesn't do RGB images. They're labeled BGR, so the red and blue are typically swapped. It's just a convention. And so we'll have to define two things here. We're going to have to define our grayscale image and our function to actually accomplish the thresholding. So we're going to do that up here. We're going to say source gray I'm going to have a destination as well. And then we're going to have a function that we define here. It's going to be a static function, and this just means that, you know, it's not beholden to any memory space, just the global memory space, right? This is the format that we need to have it, because we're going to send this as a callback to a few things, and this is going to get called every time we change our slider value. So if we move a slider in our window, it's going to call this function to actually process the image. And so it has a specific form, and this is the form. Inside here, all we're going to do is we're just going to say threshold. We take our source image into our destination image, and we're going to give it our threshold values. So we're going to have to define these as well. So we're going to say threshold value, max value, right? So this is our max threshold value, max binary value, and then our threshold type. And threshold type, there are 4 different types. And so there are 4 different types of thresholds that OpenCV does, and I'll show you them in a minute once we get this running. And then afterwards, we're just going to show it in an image in a window, and we're going to say destination. Okay. So this will do the thresholding and then show it in a window. So now we have to define these values. So we need to have threshold value. Give it an initial value of something like whatever the base default is. Let's say 200, doesn't matter. We're going to have to say max binary value. And this is a max binary value, usually 255, because you know, that's a good max value for 8-bit imagery. Threshold type, int threshold type. We're going to say 3. Now for sliders, we need to have max type. We have to say the range, right, of the values. And so we need to have max value and max type are going to be 4. So OpenCV has 4 different threshold types. 255 is max for 8-bit, right? Okay, so that should give us this. Now we have to define our scroll. Let's define our GUI elements here. We can create a track bar. OpenCV has this functionality, which is good. We give it a string. Let's just say, what's the first one going to be? Value or type? Type. Let's do type. So the type of threshold that we're going to, type of function that it's going to use is going to be named, the window name is, we've called it threshold above. It has to be the same name that we use, so it ties into the same window. The value, notice that it's a pointer to a value, so it has to be a reference to our max value. This is the value, I believe this is max value is the value that it uses, that it passes back. And so this is the one that we want to use up here. So it's threshold value is what we've called it here. So let's change that. Threshold value. And threshold type. And then, because this is for type, not value, give it max type, and then pass the function that does the processing. Okay, let's copy this and make another track bar for value, title value, give it the threshold value, max value. Okay. So we have threshold value. This should be max binary value. Okay, we're using max value. That's fine either way. Threshold type. Threshold type. We have the max type that we're using. Max value. Okay, good. So let's build. Let's see what we've done wrong. Oh, it succeeded. So cool. Let's run it and see. Okay, so what do we have? We have, notice a couple of things. Here's our live image. Here is our thresholded image. This is our processed image, okay? It's black. It's got a few things. Notice that it is changing. It does have some values, but we also have two sliders, so this is cool. So the first slider will tell us the type of threshold that it's going to, that OpenCV is doing. And we'll see what that means in a minute. We'll just keep it at 3 for a minute. And value is the threshold value. So anything above this turns white, anything below this turns black, okay? So if we move this downwards, we'll see that it is clamping the imagery at, in this case, 64, value of 64 for our luminance value. And as we go up, we get rid of more and more and more pixels, right? Now, so let's put this in the middle somewhere. We'll see what the type changes. The type, now notice that our pixels here are the actual grayscale image pixels, right? So it's actually just removing, setting pixels to black that are beneath the threshold is what this type is doing. This one is doing the opposite, right? So it's setting anything below that threshold to be the color that we keep, and anything above that to be black, right? So notice those are inverted, okay? And then 2 is it's clamping the values above at the maximum value. This is binarizing it, right? Making it a binary image, so black and white. So it's just keeping 2 images, and once again, anything below is set to white, the threshold, anything above is set to black in this case, and inverted here, right? So anything above now is set to white, anything below is set to black. So depending on your application, you might use a variety of these or a combination of these to give you different effects and to give you different pieces of information. So we can isolate just pieces of my face, which is kind of creepy, so there's my eyes. But that's kind of fun. Alright, so that's thresholds. Next video we will go over morphology.